looks like I got starting with a smaller group this week. Maybe some more people will show up as we get going. Before we begin, let me place our link in the chat there. Okay, so now that's there in case you wanted to catch up on anything or review anything. It should be all there. I think we've got nearly every video on YouTube now, which is also on the chat on the link there. I don't know if it's everyone. I think we may be missing 1 or 2 weeks. But actually, I was looking at that previously just for a second before I started. I think we're up to either this week or last week is the 50th class. So 50. Yeah, I was surprised to see that too. So 50 classes so far. That's, it's been over a year. I know that. We obviously don't do it every week. So that's really cool. We've been meeting together now for 50 weeks. Lot we have learned and a lot more to talk about. So, okay, we are finishing up the 8th chapter this week. So luckily for us, the 8th chapter is a little shorter than the 7th chapter. It was the 7th chapter being the longest one I'm pretty sure the longest one of the book. So now we're in the end, finishing up the 8th chapter. We're going to be starting with verse number 16. Now we just finished this long discussion. What I believe is all one big topic. It was this visualization of wisdom in its standing up to power, and how it perceived that we seem to be saying that wisdom fights power, or has the ability to stand up to power, because wisdom understands that power itself is limited. Human power, when we see rulers, despots, we see people in this world that they try to enforce their will upon other people, that's inherently limited. And we saw that in 2 ways. We saw that it was limited both in time and in jurisdiction. Just how long it's able to control, to enforce its will, and also how far its fingers extend. Does it get into the person themselves? And we said, kind of ended off with saying that there's something that they can't take away from you, and that's your feelings, that's your emotions, that's your ways, your methods of relating to this world. We said that what he expressed as happiness. Your happiness is always in your hands. Okay, so that's what we ended off with last week, and that brings us to now verse number 16. I think I said 17 earlier. Verse number 16, which is the second to last verse in chapter 8. So let's jump to the screen share. Let me do that. Second here, and there we go. Okay. So we are now running into a problem that we've run into before, which is that the chapters that we have are not originally from the Jewish tradition. So if you look at a Jewish book, any book of Tanakh really, if you look at it in its original form, written on scroll in the special calligraphy, you will not see these chapter breaks. The chapter breaks are entirely from outside of our sources. They originally were created, we mentioned this many times, they're created by Christian monks in some time, long time ago, and they happen to be pretty good systems, and they're relatively okay, so we stuck with them. We borrowed it from them, and we decided to keep it as part of our system just because it's easy. You will find old books that will reference which column things are on, which column a verse is on, which you'd have to have the original handwritten version of it to know what column they're referring to. So we don't have that anymore. We just use the chapters. But here's another example of what I believe. If I were to divide the chapters, I would put the new chapter starting here, not 2 verses from now. Okay. For some reason, the monks went ahead and they decided to keep this verse still as the last chapter, and they don't start the next chapter until 2 verses from where we are. I believe this would be a good new chapter start. Chapter header, beginning of a new chapter. But okay, listen, that we have what we have. And actually, we're going to find that that itself is a disagreement amongst the commentaries. So before we get into that, let's see the verse itself. Let's translate it and get a sense of what it's talking about. Okay, did that again. Okay, all right. So it says like this. Ka'asher natati et libi ladat chachma. When I have placed it on my heart to know wisdom, v'lirot et inyan, and to see the matter, asher na'asa al haaretz, which is done on the land, ki gam bayom uvalayla, it is also both day and night, sheina be'inav inenu ro'eh, that sleep in the person's eyes they do not see. Okay, they do not see sleep in their eyes. Okay, so we are automatically faced with a kind of a poetic terminology, but let's read that again before we get into that. Kasher natati et libi ladat chachma, when I have placed it on my heart to understand, to know wisdom, v'lirot et inyan, and to know and to see the matter, asher na'asa al haaretz, that is done on the land, ki, because, or then, gam bayomu v'layla, both during day and during night, sheina be'inav einenu ro'eh, the person's eyes does not see wisdom. Okay, so we're faced immediately with a number of questions over here. First of all, and this is probably the question that is probably the most important question to understand is this following the last point, or is this starting a new point? I already told you that my belief is that we're starting a new point. But there does seem to be an actual disagreement amongst the commentaries what's happening here. According to Rashi, who's the kind of the king of the commentators, he understands that we're starting a new point over here. Okay. According to the Mitsudah, who's another one of the major commentators, he says that this is really following the last idea. It all kind of boils down to what this word ka'asher means. The word ka'asher itself means when. Okay, asher means that, ka'asher is like that, which is kind of what, if you were to understand what does when mean, when means like that thing that happened, kind of. Easier, more in general, we tend to translate the word ka'asher as when. Rashi points out over here that there's two different ka'ashers really throughout Tanakh. There's ka'asher in the sense of when so-and-so did such and such. And then there's ka'asher of then, almost. It's kind of like when and then. So when in this case would be a when, as in when I went ahead to do this thing I did, then I saw something. Okay, as opposed to then, which would be following the last verse, which would be, understanding everything we've said, then I placed on my heart to understand wisdom. Okay, so Rashi says, don't read it then, read it when. I hope that didn't get too confusing. Again, boil it down, comes out that Rashi says that the word kasher means when I went ahead and placed on my heart to understand wisdom, I saw this thing. Okay, we'll see what that thing is in just a second. The Mitsudah, who's the other commentator over here, he says that it means then. So based on everything that we've spoken about so far, then I went to really think about it and I found something new. Okay, the difference ends up being what context do we have to read this verse in? Do we read this verse in context of starting a new idea, or do we read it in the context of it continuing the last idea? So again, I already revealed to you my belief is that we're starting a new thing, but I think there's a bit of a bridge over here in the sense that it's understanding the last concept of the last idea. We now are beginning a new thing, kind of building layer number 2. Okay, so I hope that wasn't too confusing. And it's all a bit theoretical so far. We haven't seen what the verse means yet, but be that as it may, I think what we're doing is keep in mind the general context of how wisdom relates to power, of how the why and the larger discussion, which we've been discussing since the beginning of the 7th chapter, of what are the traits of a wise person? How does a wise person act? How does a wise person look at the world? Okay, so kind of two contexts, two simultaneous contexts going on at the same time. Okay, again, number one, the larger context of how does the wise person act? How do they view their place in the world? And number two is how they relate to power in specifically. Okay, so now that we have that context that's provided, kind of a symbiosis of Rashi's understanding and the Mitsuda's understanding. It's not a when or a then, it's a then when I did this, such and such. It's kind of a both. Then we now can begin a new idea. Fine. Another thing that immediately pops up over here is the lack of a specific subject in the sentence. It says, I, King Solomon, or I, Kohelet, decided to go and to look into this matter, into the matter. Doesn't name the matter. And he says that the matter that is done on the land. And he says, both during day and night, this person, this unnamed person, does not see sleep in their eyes. Okay? So again, no person name, no, and it doesn't really discuss what this matter is. So that's where I think it's important for us to understand what that context was, this greater context. Meaning, again, let's look at the greater question. The big question that we've been asking is, how does a wise person relate to this world? So one of the things we've seen so far is that a wise person relates to power differently than your average person. A wise person is unafraid, has greater courage when facing power, particularly because they understand that the dynamic with power is different than people expect it to be. People see power as being omnipotent to a certain degree. The wise person understands the limits of power. So in that same way, what we're doing over here is, how does the wise person act? We're going to layer on another layer. Okay, the wise person has another way that they act with the world. So therefore, he doesn't feel a need to necessarily name the person. It's the greater context. The Ka'asher shows us that we're in the greater context of our bigger question. What this person, how does this person, who we've been talking about, the wise person, relate to the world? That I would understand to be to understand wisdom and to see the matter. That's what we're talking about. To understand wisdom, meaning how does the wise person act, and to see the matter that is done on land, how they relate with the world. Okay, those are those two things, unidentified things over there. I think that's what we're doing, and that's again why it's important to understand that kasher is bringing us into a greater, larger context. Again, kind of hearkening back to that original question since the beginning of chapter 7 is, what are the ways of the wise person? Okay, and so what does he tell us? He tells us that the way of the wise person is that both during day and nighttime, their eyes do not enjoy sleep. Their eyes do not see sleep. Okay, the nature of a wise person is that they are up, they're awake both during the day and during the night. Okay, well, that's not very pleasant. That doesn't sound like a wonderful existence, but I think he's bringing us into something new over here. And that is that why would a person not have the ability to sleep both during the day and during the night? Let me take this a step further. There are plenty of reasons why a person would not be able to sleep during the night. Okay, I'm actually doing research on this right now, but in some other work that I'm doing. But insomnia, for example, the inability to sleep at night is often it can be a factor of all number of things, but it can be a factor, let's say, of depression. If the person's going through something that is depressing them or that is worrying or anxiety provoking to the person, they may have a harder time sleeping at night. Interestingly enough, is the same person doesn't necessarily have a hard time sleeping during the day. Okay, so meaning the fact that you don't sleep at night will have a rollover into the daytime. The person will be exhausted during the daytime. Okay, so we're looking at something that's not something like depression necessarily that keeps a person awake at night, or anxiety that keeps a person awake at night because they can't because they can't, because they've got something wrong necessarily. We seem to be talking about something different, something that keeps them awake both during the day and during the night. And I would assume, and I think again, this makes sense in the context, I believe, that what we're talking about is the fact that the wise person is so busy. A truly wise person is somebody who is so busy thinking and trying to understand wisdom that they cannot rest. They never seem to be able to find the time to rest. There's always more for them to do. There's always more for them to learn and to understand, to study. Meaning that the nature of a wise person is never to be fully satisfied with the knowledge that they have. The nature of a wise person is to constantly be on the lookout for more wisdom. Okay? So, for example, when I was in school, whenever somebody would ask a really good question, when I was studying in yeshiva or anything, or in other places, when somebody would ask a really good question, they'd say, "How can you sleep at night?" All right, we have this great question over here. How can you sleep until you figure out the answer to this question? Obviously, it's an exaggeration, especially amongst teenage boys. I think we had no problem sleeping, at least not. At least during the daytime, we had no problem sleeping. During the nighttime, it was more exciting to be awake. But in reality, there's something to this. When somebody really has a desire to understand something and to uncover something, it does get hard for a person to sleep, both during the day and during the night. If you're involved in the search for wisdom, you know that you can't ever be satisfied with it. And then again, that's not just the nature of the wise person, that's the nature of wisdom itself, that it's constantly growing and it's constantly building. And that if you want to access that, you're going to have to constantly, I would say you'd have to constantly have your antenna up. Okay, you have to constantly be aware of what's going on to latch onto wisdom when it pops up. I think it's interesting to point out day and night. Those are different times, not just of the person themselves, but day and night is also the times of activity and inactivity. So when everybody else goes to sleep, that's when the person would still be active when other people are inactive. In a similar vein, King Solomon's father himself, David, writes in Psalms that I wake up at midnight to study your laws, to study the rules of the Torah. So David, who was speaking about how much he loved to study the Torah, he writes that I would wake up at midnight, and the tradition tells us that he had a harp hung over his bed, that there was a wind that would blow at midnight and would tickle the strings of the harp and wake him up, and he would that was his alarm clock, and he would go and study Torah because he wanted to, because he was always hungry for some more. And again, that's the way of a wise person. The way of a wise person is to always be looking for more information. So this is kind of our introductory verse over here to this new idea that we're bringing out now, which is that besides for the way that a wise person relates to power, there's another thing about the way that the wise person relates to wisdom itself. And that's that they always have their antennas up, I think is the best way to put it. They're always involved in understanding and learning more and researching more and trying to get deeper and a deeper understanding of what's going on. This is, I mean, maybe not to jump the gun, but if you think about it, how often do we believe that we know a topic and we stop thinking about that topic? We stop considering new possibilities in that topic. When you talk to somebody who's mastered something, so they may stop researching because they've figured it all out. In reality, that's just not the way of the world. Let's actually see. We'll see more about that in the coming verse. But the way of the world is that things always have a deeper level, and the wise person always has a desire to get a deeper understanding of that thing. Okay, so again, I think this verse 16 over here is trying to tell us this idea that we're introducing a new concept, which is not just the way that the wise person relates to power, but also the way that the wise person relates to wisdom itself, that they're constantly thirsting, constantly hungry for more. They constantly have their antennas up to the point where they can't sleep day or night. Again, kind of in a similar sense the sages tell us that there's they one of the cryptic statements of the sages of the Talmud is that they say that the righteous do not have rest neither in this world nor in the next world. That means that in whatever sense that means, I don't have a good sense of what the next world looks like, but in whatever sense it is, there's something that they're doing here that they're going to continue doing in the world to come. So if we understand that to be the study of Torah, which is how many people do understand that they're trying to understand more and more of God's wisdom, again, borrowing a term, we don't really know what that, I can't really explain what that means either, but that's a process that will continue in the world to come. It doesn't end over here. Okay, so again, that's verse. Yes, go ahead.
How would this verse be interpreted if it was a continuation of the previous verse?
That's a good question.
And if you don't have time to go into it, that's fine, but it's just, I got a curiosity.
Yeah. I can't say off the top of my head. I'd have to look back and see. The Mitzudah who's the opinion who holds that, the opinion that says that it's a continuation of the last idea. He has a whole kind of a different view of what the last verses were talking about also. So you'd have to kind of reinterpret the entire section in his voice to get a good sense of that. So I'd have to look back, and if I wanted to, I'd have to go back and see how he does that.
Okay, we'll go with Rashi then.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, we're kind of bridging the two. We're saying a mixture. It's a new idea in a larger framework. So, okay, that moves us on to verse number 17. Can I fit everything on the page here? Let me see. Oop. I can't quite fit everything on the page, so let me just make it a little smaller. Hope that's not too small. Okay. All right, so this is verse number 17. Even now, I could barely get on the page. It's a long verse. As I said before, this chapter has been engaging in long verses. So I hope that's visible to everyone. This website that I use, the Sefaria, is a great website, except for one thing, which is that they have these very large margins on the side. I kind of wish I was able to change that so I could get more words across the page instead of just in a column in the center. Anyway, he says like this. King Solomon says, again, there's the last verse now in chapter 8, and he says, "V'ra'iti et kol ma'aseh ha'elokim." I have seen all the actions of God. Ki lo yuchal ha'adam limtso et ha'ma'aseh asher na'asa tachat hashamesh. The person cannot find the matter or the action, the thing that was done under the sun, bishel, in order. That seems to be how many of the commentaries understand the word bishel. In order, asher ya'amol ha'adam, that the person should work, levakesh, to search, v'lo yimtza, and to still not find, v'gam im yomar hechacham ladat, and even if the wise person wants to know, lo yuchal, and so they cannot find. Okay. Wow, that was a journey there. So let's try that one more time. Again, long verse. Ver'iti et kol ma'aseh elokim. Let me break it up a little smaller, into smaller pieces. Ver'iti et kol ma'aseh elokim. I have seen all the actions of God. Ki lo yuchal ha'adam, because the person is not able limtso et ma'aseh, to find the actions asher na'asa tachat hashamesh, that are done under the sun. Bishel, again, in order, asher ya'amol ha'adam, so that the person should work, levakesh, to search, v'lo yimtza, and to still not find, v'gam, and even in yomar hechacham ladat, if the wise person were to say that they want to understand, lo yuchalim, so they can still not find. Okay, there's a lot of things going on in this verse. Really, I mean, actually not so many things going on in this verse, a lot of words going on in this verse. And so what he seems to be saying over here is that, what did he find? So again, he said in the last verse that he placed his mind onto this idea. He started thinking, considering this idea by the fact that the wise person is never satisfied, is unable to sleep because they lack satisfaction in in their study, in their research. So he says, now what do I see? What do I find from this? Because what I find is when you look at the world as a whole, again, Maseh Elokim, we've discussed multiple times, seems to be the objective sciences of the world, or from a more religious perspective, it's the Torah, it's the actions of God, it's how we understand how God runs the world. And he says that a person cannot fully grasp those things that are done under the sun. So even actually take it away from a spiritual perspective for a second, because he says what's done under the sun, again, always a good reminder that we're talking about this world. So he says that all the things that are done in this world, it's not possible for the person to go ahead and to find everything under the sun. And it's interesting that he keeps on using this word limso, to find, because I think I actually just thinking right now off the top of my head, I think there's an interesting idea that he specifically says limso, to find things under the sun, meaning to say that let's look at this world like a big riddle, and you peel away something and you find something new, and that's so exciting. But then you can peel away another layer and find something else, and that thing leads you to something else, to a third thing, a fourth thing, a fifth thing, all the way down. I think that's an important idea. He doesn't say to master necessarily everything under the sun, because that's also true. A person cannot master everything under the sun. But even the relationship to it is not necessarily one of mastery. It's one of finding, one of experiencing, one of finding. Thinking about it, just because my brain is on this right now. When you see scholarly research, for example, so what do we talk about? We talk about their findings. We talk about the things that they find. That means that after having gone through a process of testing and methodology and results and everything, you're going to have findings. You're going to have things that you found to be true or not true. And that's going to then open the door for more things to be found to be true or not true. The process of scholarship is constantly to take the last thing, the known information, and to replicate it first of all, and then to see, is there more that we can pull out of this, more that we can understand from this. So here also, again, this just occurred to me as we're talking, but the idea is that he doesn't talk about mastery over the things done under the sun. He talks about finding things under the sun. I mean, that itself is constantly a process of finding more information. But he does say that it's impossible for a person to find everything under the sun. It's impossible for a person to get a full grasp of everything in this world. And he presents a reason for it. Again, this word bishel kind of threw me off when I first read it. I wasn't sure what bishel meant. The commentaries all seem to indicate that bishel means in order. So in other words, part A of the verse is going to be in order to bring about part B of the verse. So it's impossible for a person to understand, to have findings on everything under the sun, but it's for a purpose. Now, I can imagine two different purposes. Why would it be impossible to understand everything under the sun? Purpose one that I would imagine would be because maybe God doesn't want you to think about everything under the sun. Maybe he wants there to be big questions that you can't have the answers to. But King Solomon doesn't go that direction. He goes with the other option, which is, why is it impossible for a person to know everything? So that they should constantly be working to find more. Okay, so instead of it being a reason to give up, a reason to give up on understanding everything, this is quite the opposite. The reason why there's always more to learn is because they say you should always be learning. And that's an amazing idea. From a Torah perspective, again, the Jewish people value study and scholarship. Even if you don't have, the way I was taught at least, is even if you don't come to a good conclusion on something, just the fact that you went about the process of researching it is, it's in and of itself an act of coming closer to God, an act of becoming a better person, even without finding results. Now, the more so if a person does find results, that leads them to more study. Study itself is something that it never ends, and that's not a reason to put down the book. That's a reason to pick up more books. If you ever go to, I was just talking to somebody recently, this past Shabbat, and they said, why is it you go to every rabbi's house and their houses are full of books? It's just because we got a lot to figure out. We're trying to figure out lots and lots of things. And again, it's not just by rabbis, it's by every scholar. You're going to find a warehouse full of books, or online or whatever it is, libraries, because there's always more to study and always more to learn. And again, that's not a reason to drop everything and say, I can't figure out everything. It's quite the opposite. The wise person, again, our context is we're talking about the wise person. The wise person looks at the same conundrum and says, oh, there's more to learn. That's amazing. There's always more to understand and to learn. So again, in this, we're talking about the relationship between the wise person and wisdom itself. What do we have? The way that the wise person looks at wisdom is that they want to keep on learning. They want to keep on studying. They want to keep on researching. Again, I'm talking from the perspective of Torah scholars, because that's what I happen to know the best, and that's what I've been exposed to the most. But in reality, it's by all scholarship. So the people who are truly dedicated to their craft are people who are constantly reworking and rethinking and reimagining and going through the research again and again and again to understand more and to peel away more layers and to keep on finding more information. Just today, I was studying something about a fellow up in Seattle by the name of Gottman. He's one of the most famous marriage and love researchers in the world, if not the most famous. He's still alive as far as I understand. I think I just looked him up recently. He's in his 90s, I think. He and his wife had a research laboratory to study how people love, how people relate to each other in couples and in marriages and otherwise also. And so one of the things that he did was he kept on researching this idea over and over and over again, and he kept on fine-tuning his methods and fine-tuning his abilities and found more and more and more information as time goes on, to the point where now again he's in his I think he's in his 90s, and he's, as far as I know, he's still working, he's still trying to figure out more about love, and that's just one concept, love, or coupling or marriage as a kind of a broader topic. But in my mind, this is where it gets amazing. You have this guy, this John Gottman, who's done all this research, dedicated his life, he and his wife, they've dedicated their lives to understanding this one concept. And there's so much more for them to know. And they're going to be out of the picture one day, and somebody else is going to take all their research and extract even more from it. But they have no connection at all to quantum physics, right? There's some other researcher who's totally involved in quantum physics and can tell you everything that there is to know, as far as they know, everything that they've ever found about quantum physics. And that person doesn't necessarily know anything about love like John Gottman does. Stephen Hawking and John Gottman, those are two different researchers, and they're both experts in their craft. And guess what? The two of them are masters of something, as far as, again, masters in some sense, but they can't share that information with each other, or they could, but one is not going to become an expert like the other one is in that field. And then you have some other guy who's going to be the world expert in AI or something like that, trying to pull something out of the headlines, right? So you have computer learning on the other side, and the three of them they all have their disciplines, and there's so much for each one of them to know and to learn. For me, it just boggles my mind. I can't even express why it's so exciting to me. But for the wise person, it's not a reason to put down the book. it's a reason to pick up more books. It's a reason to pick up more thoughts and ideas. In order so that the person searches. You can't know everything, and that should be an impetus for you to search more. And they still won't find everything. Okay? Even if the wise person says, my goal is lada'at, to know, I want to become the master on something, lo yichalem so, he won't be able to find that. That wise person will not be able to find everything that there is to know about about one topic, all the more so every topic in the world. And again, that's an impetus to keep learning, to keep studying, not a reason to stop studying. Okay, so again, I think that is the main push of these verses over here. This is telling you what is the nature of, how does a wise person relate to wisdom? It's with this thirst to know more and to understand more and to study more. Just as I was thinking, as I was talking, I was like, just take music. Someone wants to understand music, so they sit down and they learn the trombone. Okay, so they figure out the trombone. Now they're going to go and once I know trombone, I'm going to learn all the wind instruments. Okay, so they expand their knowledge to all the wind instruments, and they say, well, wind instruments aren't the only instruments, so they're going to go into the percussions. So then they pick up the percussions and they figure out all the tips and tricks and everything they need to know about the percussions. So now they know the winds and the percussions, and now they have to figure out the strings. And it's just, who's going to be able to do all this? Nobody. Nobody is going to be able to master everything. Every once in a while you find the polymaths, right? People who they seem to know a lot about everything, but even they don't know everything about everything. The sages had a term in the Talmud. They would refer to, every once in a while, they refer to somebody as Ish Ashkolot, which literally means a man of the grape clusters, which is an interesting phrase in and of itself. A man of the grape clusters. And the sages explain that Ashkolot is not an acronym, but it's whatever. It's where you kind of meld words together of Ish Asheri Kol Bo, somebody, or Asher Yesh Lo Kol, Ashkolot, right? Anyway, somebody who has everything inside of them, a little bit of everything. Somebody who's got knowledge in every area. And again, we've seen people around the history of the world who have a little bit of knowledge in every subject, but mastery over every subject, that's not something you're going to be able to do. But it gives you this drive and this thirst to understand more. And that's, if you get to see that in somebody, that's an amazing thing. A truly wise person, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep their ears open, their eyes open, their antennas up, to constantly be learning and understanding more things. So what that does is that brings us to the end of chapter 8. I believe we're going to continue this discussion to chapter 9. I'm still working on figuring out exactly how to read this verse 1 of chapter 9. And it happens to be we're at time right now. So I was saved by the bell, so to speak, because I'm still working on on how to break up this verse properly in my own understanding before I present it to you. So again, I was saved by the bell here. I'm going to go to the main screen. Okay, so again, that was the end of chapter 8, where he begins this discussion of the way the wise person relates to wisdom, and it's with the thirst. It's with this unending, unsatisfiable thirst for knowledge. Even the unknowns and the unknowables of the world, the person nevertheless is constantly trying to learn more and study more, because that's just the way of a wise person. That's part of what makes them wise, and that's a factor of their wisdom. Okay, hope that was understandable. I got a little passionate there because I find this stuff fascinating myself. All right, we'll pick up next week, God willing.